How do we know if we've had a true spiritual awakening? And how do we determine someone who's had a spiritual awakening from somebody who's just has a good image? It's important to know the differences between these three areas. One is if we've had our own spiritual awakening or had a spiritual awakening, and two, if others have had spiritual awakenings, and the difference between someone who's got a very smooth image and has not had a spiritual awakening, but appears to. Hi, my name is Richard Haight, and I've been spending my entire life following the spiritual awakening path that ultimately took me to Japan, where I studied for 15 years, receiving master's licenses in 4 samurai arts and 1 healing art. Through this experience and through this training, I received many wonderful insights and a certain experience of oneness and awakening, so we should say, that ultimately transformed my life. And through these videos, I'd like to share a little bit of that insight with you. If you'd like to start a daily practice of awakening, through my samurai training, I learned what I describe as the warrior's meditation. It is active, with the eyes open, with all the senses alert and alive, that'll bring you to a point of clarity throughout your daily life. It is meant to be used while walking, while talking, while being, while sitting, even while sleeping. It is not like any other meditation you've ever experienced. We're offering a free 7-day trial. Click the link below. I'd love to see you there. And now on to the topic of this video. To best understand awakening, what I mean by awakening anyway, is we can use the word apocalypse. Apocalypse is often misunderstood. The term is misunderstood as just being a breakdown or total destruction. But really, apocalypse is synonymous with a proper understanding of hell. Hell, will describe that as being a psychological experience that we go through where all that is false ultimately breaks down or burns off, leaving only that which cannot burn, that which is fundamentally true. Awakening is like that. An awakening oftentimes is a traumatic experience. Oftentimes an awakening is it is a traumatic experience that on the other side of which there is a great opening of the heart. Near-death experiences are often this way. They are types of awakenings, tremendous types of awakenings potentially, where your entire life is reviewed through the death process, and you realize how much falsehood you have been expressing in your life, how often your values have been, how much your inner compass has been astray. And if it was an awakening of any sufficient depth, it will inspire a transformation of your life. It's usually a gradual transformation where we're striving to be more authentic, more honest, more unified in our inner and outer expressions in a harmonious way. If we have had a sufficiently powerful experience, sort of the Godhead type experience for a long enough period of time, many hours or days, that transformative experience can be so profound. It can burn off so much material. It's like you have a whole new life. It's as if you were one person one day and the next you're a different person. A completely different set of values, or a largely different set of values, and an entirely new way of perceiving your reality, the physical reality around us, an entirely different attitude towards reality. And so there can be many different, we'll say, levels of awakening. And as we go through our process of awakening, there can be new experiences that take us ever deeper, refinements in the awakening, essentially more burn off. It's just that once we have actively chosen the spiritual awakening path, oftentimes that burn off is not so much a trauma as a joy. Even though there's pain, there's always pain during the burn off, there's a knowing behind it that that pain is actually constructive. It's almost like a bodybuilder. They go into the gym and they're working out and it's very painful what they're doing. And, they're groaning and maybe even screaming and grunting through these exercises and they're sore the next day. But inside they know they feel they've accomplished something that's more important than the pain. And so once we've decided that our life is dedicated to awakening, suffering is no longer what it used to be. We go through the pain, but the pain is not, there's not a psychological suffering in that pain so much as there used to be. There might be some, but it diminishes as we have ever more clarity before we see that it serves a purpose, that it's not just a loss, that it's not just a waste. Ultimately, that is the right attitude of awakening. And it's not just a verbalized attitude. It's not a philosophy, although I know it's often described in that way, as if it's a philosophy of life. If it's a true awakening, it's not a philosophy. It's just obvious. It's not something you need to think about. It's just clear as day. It's like the rising sun. It's not something that can be debated within yourself. Others can debate it and doubt it, but you yourself, you know clearly. It's just obvious, and it can't be unseen. Philosophy can be debated and it can be countered, and you can, change your ideas and add a new scenario. And this is not like that at all. Although to people who have not experienced an awakening, it can appear that way. Fundamentally, the way to know if someone has had a true, good example. We all know people who are just extremely socially savvy. They don't debate, they don't argue, they get along with people very, very well. And it's easy to think that those people may be awakened. And I've actually met people that are highly awakened that they have no social skills. It's not that they're mean or cruel, they just tell you very straight and honest. And it's not that they're judging, although you may perceive that you were judged. It's usually your own insecurity that's causing that. They're just clear as a piece of paper. And they're just as plain as a stone, and they don't play with any social graces. And oftentimes people will misunderstand those individuals. I suspect that that Jesus Christ was actually such a person who really, he didn't play with the social graces. He was just plain and clear. He would be best described as, in the samurai terms, as a master. And his job is just simply to be like sandpaper that rubs down all the edges off of the disciples so that they're smooth as a polished stone. The goal is not to be liked. The goal is to be very clear and to give good, clear feedback. This is not always appreciated and it's not always pleasant. But that is oftentimes necessary for people to make improvement. Not everybody can handle that type of teacher. And then there's the type of individual who hasn't really had that much of an enlightenment. Maybe they've read a lot of books. They haven't had really a true awakening, but they can act the act and they can play the role, and they're smooth socially, and they know psychology, and they know how to say the right words that are going to spark you and they're going to get you hooked in. And they seem so smooth. But if you really watch their lives, you will see the chaos. You will see, but you really need to watch their lives. And that's where the difference is. The awakened individual, highly awakened individual, utters very few falsehoods. They're if it is, it's just that they misspoke. It's not intentional whatsoever. They're devoid of hypocrisy to the extent that a human being can be. They're quite literally walking the straight and narrow, but in a relaxed, clear way. The unawakened one is full of hypocrisies. They're full of compulsions and urges. They may hide that from the general flock, but those who are close around them, if they're being honest, will see it. That's a salesperson. That's not awakening. Now, it's possible, ultimately, once we've had an awakening, that it's possible that we use that awakening to refine our entire lives. That's the ultimate, I think, at least for me, the direction and awareness that I had, is that this had to permeate my entire life. So ultimately, correcting expression through words is very, very important. Now, with my direct disciples and direct close students, very, very clear and frank with them. Not cruel, but very, very clear and frank with them, so as not to waste their time whatsoever. But, in a social setting, we're out and about in in a restaurant or whatever, got the polite face mask on, and just playing the act of just, the social world, and that's fine. And I actually find that quite beneficial for me, to be able to um, smooth out the social experience, because that was not something that I was strong in when I was young. I had many layers of awakening, and I was so into that inner world that I had really very little external experience socializing. And so once, of course, it was time for me to teach, that became the barrier, because some people couldn't didn't know how to take the the frankness, didn't know how to take the lack of social grace. And so my process has been finding that social grace to be able to convey the message in as smooth a way as possible, to get as little resistance as possible, so that the other person can then use that to the extent that they would like to in their lives, without having any kind of negative feeling connected with it. It's always a challenge, but I find the challenge beautiful. So there's essentially 3 points we want to be aware of regarding awakening. There are many levels of awakening, and each of these are constructive. And the deeper the awakening, the depth of the awakening is not related to the story of the awakening. It doesn't really matter, what your external experience of awakening was. It could have been a near-death experience. It could have been a breakup with your girlfriend. It could have been the death of your wife or a child. It could have been experiencing the Godhead. Those things are all, those are the stories. The depth of the experience is how deeply it hit within, how deeply it impacted the inner realm of identification, the inner realm of our values. And if it's the deeper that it hits there, the deeper that it is shown a light through those areas of congestion, the more we will be inclined, the more we will feel a powerful desire to correct our inner realm as well as our external realm. And so the depth of the awakening is not related to the story specifically of it, but how deeply it hit that inner realm, and how much wisdom shines through our lights, shines through our lives as we move forward from that awakening. We also need to know the difference between the awakening individual and a socially graceful individual. Those two are not necessarily the same. And not to be fooled by the salesperson spiritual teacher. You may need to have a spiritual teacher in your life. And you may be drawn to some of those very, very socially smooth. It's like they understand the psychology and how to kind of manipulate and create a following. But there isn't wisdom there. And you will see it by observing them carefully over a period of time. People can fake for a couple of months, but if you watch them closely in their personal lives, you will start to see through it. And having such experiences isn't wrong. If you have to go to such a teacher and go through that experience, as long as you take it with the right attitude, it's a learning experience. You're refining your inner compass of awareness. Then again, you might actually be drawn to a teacher who's very, very frank. They're not socially refined. They spent their life in a cave. You're not going to learn the social skills that way. That's just a reality. They may be utterly boring to death. They may not tell jokes. They may not be too exciting. They may not even look too cool. They may look terrible. Jesus is described in the Bible as not being very, not having a very nice appearance, but he did everything well. He wasn't a handsome person as is portrayed oftentimes in the movies. He might have been actually a fairly ugly guy, physically speaking. He also wasn't really good with the social graces necessarily. but he had a cutting awareness. And those who were sincere. Now, at that time in Jerusalem, it was a hard time. They were under a lot of pressure from Rome. They were having a lot of economic issues. And there was a lot, because of that sort of social apocalypse and economic apocalypse that was going on at the time, a time of transition, there was a greater percentage of people than normal who were seeking an authentic expression of spirituality. And so they were drawn to Jesus's words. He probably wasn't very popular while he was alive. His popularity was an occurrence of his students, or students of students, or even people that took on the name of Christianity who were never students of his students, who were more socially savvy and were good at kind of getting those hooks in and creating a movement, oftentimes absent the wisdom. I won't say that that's wrong. There can be growth in that too. But in your own spiritual awakening, and this is the most important thing, in your own spiritual awakening, no matter what the depth is, see if you can apply that wisdom to all of your life, to every aspect, including the social aspect. From a place of purity, not from a place of trying to gain something, to win some extra credit spiritual points, or to get more friends, or all that trivial stuff. You may do that for a time, but move away from that little by little. We're looking for, a true awakening is looking for a truth which is unchanging, that does not die, that is pure, that is vibrantly aware, that transcends life, but during life keeps us fully engaged. It's not a withdrawal from life. It's an engagement. It's not the same thing as happiness that most people mean by happiness, but it's a deep meaningfulness. If there's a feeling of meaninglessness in your life, something's gone astray. And with that, I'll remind you, the Warriors Meditation, free 7-day trial, it's going to be an experience like nothing you've ever had. Highly recommend it. Hope to see you there. Bye-bye.